Good morning. Good to see everybody this morning. Thankful that we were able to attend and be here together and worship God together. I want to take a section of that reading that Jimmy just did in Ephesians, the 5th chapter. And it says, redeeming the time, for the days are evil. We want to discuss what that means for us today. Several weeks ago, maybe even several months ago, I did a lesson on John 9 and verse 4. The night is coming when no man can work. And that's true for all of us. We age. We don't get younger. Somebody says, well, when I get up to be 60, I start going back in years. Well, you might, the way you act, but not age-wise. 1 John 5 and verse 9. The whole world lies under the sway of the evil one. And then Revelation 12 and verse 12 talks about the fact that the devil knows that he has a short time. So all of these combined, and thinking about the fact that the days are evil, redeem the time. What are we talking about when we say that? I want to say, first of all, or maybe even ask the question would be a better way of putting it. How do you view time? What's your thinking when we think about time? If somebody asks you that, would you say, oh, I have more than enough time? I can do everything I want to, and I've got time left over. I don't think we hear people say that very often, do we? And somebody might say, well, I don't have enough time. I can't get everything done that I need to get done. I just don't have enough time. We'll talk about that and see what the Bible has to say. Philippians 4 and verse 11. This is Paul speaking. And he says, not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstance I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. And then he says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Not that Paul is saying I can do everything, but he says I can do everything that God intends for me to do. If he could do everything that God intended him to do, then I believe that he's saying I have enough time. And when we think about that, time is short, 24 hours in a day. Some people break it down into minutes and seconds and so forth. But however you want to think about time, it's moving forward. But Paul says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Well, Romans 15 in verse 28. Let's turn over there, and I want to talk a little bit about some things that Paul said again. Romans 15. We'll start with verse 24. Paul is in prison when he's writing this. And he says, whenever I go to Spain, for I hope to see you in passing and to be helped on my way there by you, when I have first enjoyed your company for a while. Now that takes a little bit of time, doesn't it? And Paul is expecting, hoping, praying that he'll be able to go to Spain. And he'll go through and talk to these brethren. But now I am going to Jerusalem serving the saints. For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. Yes, they were pleased to do so. They are indebted to them, for if the Gentiles have shared in their spiritual things, they are indebted to minister to them also in material things. Therefore, when I have finished this, and I have put my seal on this fruit of theirs, I will go on my way by way of you to Spain. I said he was in prison. No, he's not at this point. But he's on the way to take this contribution to the poor saints in Jerusalem. But he's thinking about something in the future. And he talks about the fact that he wants to be able to go through Rome, talk to the saints there, and go on to Spain. The Bible doesn't talk about him making that trip. But I believe it's very possible that he did succeed in going to Spain. But now think about what that means in lieu of time. They didn't have airplanes that they could hop in and just, fly from one place to another. They didn't have cars that could travel and the roads that were available to do that. Travel was slow during that time. And Paul had to be thinking about the time and the ability that he had to be able to do this. You think about this travel, there would have been months. And then to go over to Spain. He's not talking about something he could do tomorrow. So he was thinking about the future of his time. Now he understands, as we all should, that time is limited to a certain extent. Time could end for any of us at any moment. But he is thinking about the possibilities of what he can do given the time that the Lord will give him. Go with me to Philippians, the first chapter. In Philippians chapter 1 and verse 12. I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel, so that my imprisonment in the cause of Christ has become well known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard and to everyone else. And that most of the brethren, trusting in the Lord because of my imprisonment, have far more courage to speak the word of God without fear. Some, to be sure, are preaching Christ even from envy and strife, but some also from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, rather than from pure motives, thinking to cause me distress in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in this I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice. And then continuing on, for I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayers and the provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. according to my earnest expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in anything, but that with all boldness Christ will even now, as always, be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I am to live on in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me, and I do not know which to choose. I am hard-pressed from both directions, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that is very important. Yet to remain on in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you for all progress and joy in the faith. Now, he is in prison here. And just think about today, if you were sitting in prison, think about how you would feel. But think about Paul. What would he be doing? He's not able to get out. He's not able to go and continue the work that he's been doing. But he's writing to these Philippian brethren, and he says he wants to be with them. Time is something very important to Paul here. And we need to think about setting goals. We need to think about what we're going to do today. Let's suppose, and I think you can just pick up the news or watch news on TV, and you will see people dying every day. Many years ago, I was studying with a man back in Atlanta, and he said, I'll come to church Sunday morning. And I was excited to hear that he was interested in coming to church. He didn't show up. I found out later that he had gotten up, got dressed, and he was walking out the front door, and he had a heart attack and died. Time was over. He wanted to do right, but he ran out of time. And that happens to a lot of us. You hear of people dying in car crashes. You hear of people having heart attacks, strokes, and just in their youth even, and not able to live another day. We do not know when time will end. But when we think about what we need to do with time, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the life of Christ. He lived on earth roughly 30 years. Most of us in here today are older than 30. We've got a few youngers. But most of us have lived longer than Jesus did here on earth. What did he do with his time? He made trips around Palestine. He trained his apostles. And this is only 3 years or so of his life. He made provision for the Holy Spirit to come. He personally taught his apostles. The Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon in the Bible. Maybe Acts 2 would be right up there with it. But the miracles that he did, the healing, spreading the word and talking to people. Can you imagine Jesus getting up early in the morning and saying, I've got to run. I've got to go over here. I've got to go over there. He would have been in great shape, running all around. But that's not the way he was. He went from place to place and continued preaching. His time was going to be short. but he knew that he had enough time. I think when we think about this, let's go to John the 11th chapter. Here we have Jesus getting word that Lazarus is sick. John 11 verse 2 says that. Verse 3, the sister sent word, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. What did Jesus do? Did he immediately put everything aside and say, let's go and see what I can do to help? It was 2 days, verse 6, before he decided to go. And he says in verse 7, let us go to Judea. But look at verse 9. Or verse 8, we'll read that too. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. This he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. But I go so that I may awaken him out of sleep. He knew Lazarus had died. He knew when he received word that Lazarus was sick, what was going to happen. But he waited 2 days because he knew that he would be able to raise Lazarus. Now his disciples were kind of upset. Verse 12, the disciples then said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. It's just, they were looking at it from one aspect, and Jesus understood it from another. But he did not hasten to go. Now, what does that tell us? Besides the fact that I just said that he knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, it tells us that he understood that just running around and rushing around was not the thing that he needed to do at this point. Perhaps he had other things that he needed to do right where he was before he left. And I think it was a good lesson to his apostles too, to understand we have things that we need to accomplish wherever we are. Now, go with me to Acts 20 and verse 7. We talked about this, alluded to this morning, Acts 20 and verse 7. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul began talking with them, intending to leave the next day, and he prolonged his message until midnight. Go back to verse 6. We sailed from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread and came to Troas within 5 days, and there we stayed 7. Why did he stay 7 days? That's a whole week. He had a mission that he was out to go back to Jerusalem. But verse 7 is very clear. He stayed because on the first day of the week he gathered together with them to partake of the Lord's Supper, the communion that we partook of just a little while ago. Every first day of the week is the way we understand that verse to me. When we come together to worship, it is upon the first day of the week. Go back around 200 or 300 AD, maybe even a little bit later, and that changed. Zwingli and some others started teaching that all we have to do is partake of the Lord's Supper 4 times a year, once a quarter. And that's all we have to do. Paul felt it was so important that he delayed. He spent a week there. Now, turn over to the 21st chapter, in verses 3 and 4. When we came in sight of Cyprus, leaving it on the left, we kept sailing to Syria and landed at Tyre, for there the ship was to unload its cargo. And after looking up the disciples, we stayed there 7 days, and they kept telling Paul through the Spirit not to set foot in Jerusalem. We think of Acts 20 and verse 7 as important, and it is, but again, just a little while later, he stayed 7 days to be there with the saints. Go to chapter 28 of Acts. In verse 13. From there we sailed around and arrived at Rhegium, and a day later a south wind sprang up, and on the second day we came to Puteoli. And there we found some brethren, and were invited to stay with them for 7 days, and thus we came to Rome. Paul felt it very important to use the time that he had with these brethren. He stayed 7 days to partake of the Lord's Supper in Acts 20 and verse 7. In these other 2 passages, he stayed 7 days. It doesn't say specifically to partake of the Lord's Supper, but I believe that was one of the reasons that he could partake of the Lord's Supper with these brethren. Let me ask a question here. Do we think that that is important to us? Let's suppose that we're going to travel. Let's suppose that we've got planned a trip that we're going to, drive somewhere several days out. Are we planning? Do we plan to be able to stop somewhere and worship and partake of the Lord's Supper with other brethren? Or do we kind of get out on the road and we say, I just, I can't find a place. It's just not working out. What's our attitude? Paul delayed 7 days, 3 times, to be able to be with the brethren and partake. Are we thinking about the time that we spend and how we use it? Now, go to Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter. Passage we are probably familiar with. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God had done from the beginning until the end. He has made everything appropriate in its time. God has set everything in its own proper seasons. He has brought the whole creation into concert to the ultimate accomplishment of his purposes. Every year, it's the same. The earth rotates, The sun rises, sun sets, stars come out at night. We go through the seasons. God has set everything in motion, and time is moving forward. But you see, God is concerned about time in these passages. So let us have confidence to believe that God will order our lives in the same way. We fret. We get upset. We feel like we just don't have enough time. Well, slow down and think about how you're using that time. Think about your goals. Think about what's important. Think about what you can do to be able to be a servant, true servant of God. Now, let me close with this. How can we think about the time that we need to use? Galatians 5 and verse 4, I think, is a very important passage that will help us to understand this. Galatians 5 and verse 4. And that's not the passage I'm looking for. Well, we'll move on. But it's the idea that what I was going to say is the man that walked out of that house on the way to church, heart attack, passed away, before he was able to make a decision to obey or not to obey. But at least he thought he was coming for the right reason. How do we use time in our lives? What about the lost and the saved? Are we interested? Are we seeking to reach out to those around us? I tell you what, you never know when that one person that you meet may never see another tomorrow. Are you interested in trying to reach out while the time that you have and take an opportunity to talk to them about the gospel? I started 10 years ago or more with the Bible devotionals. And when I would talk to somebody in a store, talk to somebody that I would come in contact with, and invite them to strangers, but invite them to be added to the message, and they would say yes, I realized after a while that what I was doing was very important from the standpoint that I was able to stay in contact with them. If you meet somebody in the grocery store, that may be the last chance you ever have to talk to them. But if you're sending them a Bible devotional message, you're still in contact with them. It may end, but at least you're building kind of a relationship, and that's what we need to do. We need to take the time that we have and build relationships with others. Don't ignore people. Use that time to help teach the gospel. What about writing letters? Oh, that's old school. We don't do that anymore. I wrote a letter several years ago to a preacher back in Atlanta, thanking him for something he had said or done. I'm not sure he could read my writing very well, but he later said, I really appreciated it because you wrote it. And when you take a card, or you take a piece of paper and you write down something to somebody who's struggling and suffering, that is showing concern and love for that person. We've gotten too much into the digital environment today. It's good in some ways, but building relationships with others, think about just handwriting a letter to encourage them, to strengthen them. And Karen and I have gotten several letters from people here. We have been overjoyed to know that you are concerned about us, and you have handwritten these letters. And I really appreciate it. Open up your homes. Invite people to come and study with you and to have a meal. What about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch? God directed Philip to that eunuch. He was searching. He was reading Isaiah, but he didn't understand it. And Philip shows up and gets in the chariot with him and rides along and teaches him. He used this time to be able to have the opportunity of teaching that eunuch. How many people will die today? Think about that. I'm not talking about somebody that's terminally ill and knows they're going to die. I'm talking about somebody that is healthy, at least from their viewpoint, and all of a sudden they pass away. Have we used the time to reach out to these people? It may be the only opportunity and hope that they have. You never know. Use your time. Redeem the time. As Paul said in Ephesians, because the days are evil. Go out and use your time. Thank you. If there's anyone here this morning that is subject in many ways to the invitation of our Lord, let it be known to the brethren